I'm really excited because this is the first of the big ideas that are the theme of Big Ideas for a Better Australia. And I'm really excited because of what John actually said right at the very start when he was helping me to open this conference. And people object about conferences and say it's just a talk fest. Well, as John pointed out, that's true. That's kind of the definition of a conference. But also, words contain ideas. And if ideas didn't matter, then the Gutenberg press would not have changed the world. But we know that it did. Ideas have consequences, and sometimes putting an idea into someone's head yields fruit decades later, who knows how long later, and can actually change the world. So here we have an idea for you that is the first of our big ideas for a better Australia. And the person who's going to bring it and introduce it to us is David Landini. Would you please put your hands together for David Landini? Do you want the left turn or the... Let's go. That's your clicker there. Forwards and backwards.
So I've got that, doesn't it? Does that work?
It'll come up in a minute.
Okay. Thank you very much, Topher, for that introduction, and it's great to be here. I just would like to say the speakers that I've heard to date so far have been very, very impressive. Some really good ideas, some really good, well, not ideas, but observations, and certainly good for the betterment of the people. And ultimately, in my opinion, whatever policies or actions or whatever a government does, ultimately it has to be aimed at the betterment of the people. And I think that's where the left wing, if you want to call them that, I think that's where they have a big advantage over ordinary people. I don't call them too ordinary, they're a little bit different. But they always express their ideas as the betterment of the people. It's for this, it's for, I'm going to help this elderly lady, I'm going to help this poor person here and all this sort of stuff. They don't tell you that they're going to take all the money out of your back pocket here and you're going to be a lot poorer for it. They don't tell you that, but they tell you the good stuff, and people love it. One of the speakers mentioned before, I think it was, I won't quite quote the name, but the siren call of socialism. It is a siren call. It's I'm going to help you. And people love it. And there's so many countries in the world. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just nice and close, please.
Sorry. So it is a siren call, but it's not a true call. It makes people poorer. And anyway, that's not the reason I'm here for. We've had a lot of good people have said a lot of great things, a lot of great points made. So, sorry, just a little bit about myself. I'll just, some personal stuff, just to give a bit of context of where I come from. My name's David Landini. I'm married. I have 6 adult children. I'm self-employed. I've been self-employed since 1989. I live in a small town called Warcool, 3 hours west of here. It's an irrigation area, a country area. Now, in that area, and even in the wider area of the Riverina, we get a lot of bad legislation that comes out of various governments, state governments and federal governments, and they are bad. For example, there's really, really bad water legislation that comes out. You may have all heard about the Murray-Darling Basin Plan and so forth. And I'll just give credit to Topher here now. A number of years ago, Topher, on his own initiative, did a great series on the water issue, because Topher himself knew that this is wrong, this is crook. What they're doing is deceptive and destructive. And it was, so well done, Topher. So we get that legislation. That legislation comes out, and basically we can't have farmers can't have any irrigation for water. And water is used for food production. 90% of it's food production, then you get other sources such as cotton and wool. But all these are fundamental human needs, and water is so important to that. But the legislation we get now comes out, and it's you can't have that water. You've got to save the Murray River. You've got to run the water out to sea. That's important for the environment. It's total fraud. But the bottom line is the legislation that comes out, it takes water out of production, reduces the wealth production on farm, reduces the employment in country areas. And if you reduce the employment, you haven't got a job. I haven't got a job. People around me haven't got a job. What happens when we haven't got a job? We've got to go. We can't stay there in the country without a job. It's very, very important to have wealth production, to have jobs. And what they're doing, they're taking the water out of the area, that's reducing the food production, reduces jobs, reduces the people, because we have to go. So the people who make these laws, most of these laws are made in the city areas, they feel good, we lose our job. It's not an equal equation. But there's also the timber industry. Victoria's more obvious. They've prohibited entirely native timber harvesting. You know, that's so bad. In New South Wales, it's not much better. And New South Wales is probably only 5 or 10 years behind Victoria. In New South Wales, they go about a different way. They just declare national parks, and the definition of a national park is you can't have a timber industry in there. So the timber industry shut down. And just for example, a town near where I'm from is Mathoura. There was a mill or forest, a state forest. It's been logged for 150 years. It's a sustainable logging program. They have different compartments and they go around. I think it's a 30-year rotation. They take out about, I don't know, it's only a small proportion of each compartment. So you've got this forest that's been there for 150 years and there's more trees now than what there ever used to be. But the New South Wales state government turned it into a national park, and that by definition shut down the industry. Now that was an $80 million per annum a year industry. And when I say $80 million a year, that's just not noughts and crosses on a bank statement. That's $80 million worth of jobs. $80 million worth of people that could stay in that area who can't anymore because they haven't got a job because they shut that timber industry down. So that's just that one example. And I'll just go back to the water issue. That's a billion-dollar industry. That's a multi-billion-dollar industry every year. So they take the water out and they won't stop. Like, they won't stop. They take a bit now, they take a bit more later on, and at the end of the day, ultimately, there won't be any water available for irrigation at all. And that's a multi-billion-dollar a year industry. And what happens there is there's billions of dollars worth of jobs, because that's what dollars are. They're jobs. They're a measurement of job value. Multi-billions dollars worth of jobs aren't there anymore in the countryside. So we have those two things, and there's a lot more, but there's one more I would like to raise. So they don't take everything off us, no, but they give us all sustainable electricity generation programs. So that's great. So the people in the middle of Sydney and Melbourne, because that's where these ideas come from, they take our water, take our jobs, take our timber and all this sort of stuff, but they give us their junk. And it is junk. People here know, I think we're pretty well on the same line. I don't have to tell everyone it's fraud, because we all know that. So they give us their junk. We won't have that. So I saw all these problems and I thought, well, what can I do? I've been to a lot of demonstrations, heaps, lots of them. But I'm not a farmer. My parents had a farm. I'm off a farm. I deal with farmers all the time. So I thought, well, look, these problems are ultimately political problems. They're not economic problems. The decisions are made politically. So I thought, well, the local party was the National Party, and so I joined the National Party. And just on that, I was in there for about 10 years. And I left after about 10 years. I just realised this party's not on our side. Simply not. So, but while I was in the National Party, it was a real education. Got to meet Deputy Prime Ministers and Ministers and all that sort of stuff. And it really wasn't an impressive lesson, to be quite frank. So, very human, if that's to be polite, the politicians I met. So what I say is, in the context of the National Party, it's not like Senator Roberts in the One Nation, different kettle of fish entirely. But I will say the warning though, Senator Roberts, if One Nation gets into power and becomes a professional political party like these others, I think they'll all go the same, to be quite frank. I hope that's not the case. I know you individually won't. But once parties go professional, they're not here for you and me anymore. They're professional parties, they're professional politicians, they're there to get elected, they're there to form government. And one of the other speakers said, I think it was Professor Zimmerman, said, governments don't care for you. I'm not sure who said it. Someone said it. Governments don't care for you. Politicians don't care about you. He's exactly right. They don't either. Most. They don't. So that's from a National Party perspective anyway. Labor Party might be different, Liberal Party might be different. So we'd have all this legislation that would be proposed and so forth. And we got really good representatives, farmer representatives, group representatives, local council representatives, and even great media representatives. We've got one great media representative here now, and I'll just point out Lloyd Polkinghorne from the Kundrook-Barron Bridge, one of the best media men around. Honest, true, great, and got the welfare of the people at heart. So they would propose all this legislation, and our representatives would rebut them and knock them down. Hey, that's not true. It's not right. You don't have to do that because what you're based on is not right. But they'd still do it. And after this happened over a number of years, like this just happened a lot of the time, and I was in the National Party, and in the National Party at the base level, there's a lot of good members, and we'd have state conferences and so forth, and we'd put up these motions for agendas, and they get passed, you know, but our political representatives wouldn't act on them. So over time, I'm a little bit slow, but I do get there eventually. Over time, I come to the same conclusion that I think what Professor Zimmerman said, politicians don't actually care about us. And with policies and that, what I realise is it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. It doesn't matter who's good or bad. Political decisions are made on the politics. They're not made on who's right, who's wrong, or who's good or who's bad. They're made on the politics. And I'll see if I can hopefully work this out. That was meant to... I'll just... technology with my...
The middle one goes forward.
Oh, does it? So politics. The conclusion I came to is politics, and like I said before, it's not right or wrong, or who's good or bad. Politics is the numbers. And if you've got the numbers, you will succeed. And if you haven't got the numbers, you will fail. And all the speeches and presentations and all sorts of things that get put before parliaments and all this sort of stuff, they're very interesting, but ultimately, now, to me, my experience has been that it really doesn't make any difference. It just comes down to who's got the numbers, and if you've got them, you're going to win. And if you haven't got them, you're going to lose. Make the best speech you like. Do all the theatrics you like, but if you haven't got them, you're going to lose. If you've got them, you're going to win. So that was the conclusion I come to. So I just want to go back one if I can. I can't, so it's a one-way street. Well, look at this.
The bottom button goes backwards.
Is it?
The lowest button.
Does too. Yep. So what I wondered is, look, this is just a one-way track. We're not getting any traction here. And I thought, well, what do we do? Do we just lose our jobs? Do we just accept that we've got all sorts of problems? And I've just sort of lost one slide that I should have put on there. But I wondered, well, what can we do? Because the numbers aren't there, and I've lost my plot a little bit. I must apologise for that. But we haven't got the numbers. So what do? Do we just accept that fate that we're going to lose our wealth production, lose our jobs, and we have to go away, or do we look for another solution? And I've decided myself, and this is not a new idea. This idea's been around for 130 years. We actually have to form a separate state from the major states of Australia, that is New South Wales and Victoria. Now, just on this here, if anyone wants to know what we're talking about, the Riverina, well, that's the New South Wales section of the Riverina. It's pretty big. Victoria, and it's a two-state thing. It's not just New South Wales, it's also Victoria. Now, this is just a guide. It's not set in stone. This is not the final boundaries, but it's just an idea of what we're talking about. And I shall get this worked out at some stage. And politics is numbers. Now, what are the numbers? Now, when I was in the National Party, because we put up different proposals and none of them got through, and I started to think, well, what are the numbers here? We knew that we knew that New South Wales is dominated by Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. We know Victoria is dominated by Melbourne, but what are the actual numbers? So at some stage, I just doodled around and got an electoral map out and looked at them. These are the state electorates in New South Wales and Victoria. And you can see in New South Wales there's 93 electorates in the Legislative Assembly, 71 in that area there, Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong, and 22 in the rest of the state. And in Victoria, the proportion's about the same, it's just a different state. There's 88 electorates in Victoria, 67 in that Geelong, Melbourne, Mornington Peninsula area, and 21 non-urban electorates, and which is not really, it's actually a bit worse than that because Ballarat's got one electorate, and that's pretty well an urban seat as well, and Bendigo's got 2. So there's a real domination of the states by these urban populations, and the decisions in the political decisions are made by the people in these areas. Over 76% of the population in New South Wales is in that area there, and the remainder in the state. It doesn't matter what we say or do, the decisions are made by the majority, and they have an overwhelming majority. And in Victoria, it's the same. Now, that's pretty bad. It just that just shows that the states are overwhelmed by the urban areas of those states. But if you look into it, it's even worse, because in New South Wales, there's 2 parties whose policies are officially opposed to all the industries that our livelihoods depend on, and they are the Greens, which people are probably familiar with. But there's another party called the Sustainable Australia Party. They used to be called the Sustainable Population Party. They changed their name and stood candidates in nearly every electorate in the last state election. So in the last state election in New South Wales, the Greens and the Sustainable Australia Party got 556,000 votes, number one votes in the Legislative Assembly. Now, there's only 545,000 voters in all that area. There's more people in New South Wales, and most of those voters are in that urban area and up in the North Coast. There's more people in New South Wales who vote for the Greens and the Sustainable Australia Party, who are officially opposed to all the industries that our livelihoods depend on, than every single voter in that area of the state. So you can see by that why it doesn't matter what facts and figures we put up, they just keep doing what they're doing. Because if in New South Wales, if a member of parliament wants to get elected and if a political party wants to form government, they have to earn the votes. They have to chase the votes. The votes are in the urban area, and within that urban population, there is a massive subpopulation that is officially opposed to all the industries that our livelihoods depend on. So that's in New South Wales. Now, this is the state election in Victoria, and I think that was 2022, the Victorian state election. In the Victorian state election, there were 416,000 people voted in the Legislative Assembly for the Greens, and there's only 413,000 voters total in all those electorates. Most of the people who vote for the Greens, who are officially opposed to all the industries that our livelihoods depend on, are in the urban areas, but there's more of those people than every single electorate there. I think there's 11 electorates there. And that just illustrates the numbers that are opposed to the industries that our livelihoods depend on. So what that says to me, it just explains why it doesn't matter what we say or do or how many protests we go to, the ball just keeps rolling that way. It's simply because the numbers are where they are, and the numbers are opposed to us, and they are overwhelming. History has shown that these numbers are simply overwhelming. So if anyone thinks that if we can talk to them and we can explain the facts and the figures, and if anyone thinks that they'll pay attention and change their minds, they won't, because they're philosophically opposed to us. And I'll just repeat this. Any politician that wants to get elected in the urban areas of New South Wales or Victoria, if you go against that green agenda, if you want to make a statement like, yeah, vote for me and I'll help the farmers in the Riverina take water out of the Murray River and grow rice and cotton, you'll lose about a squidillion votes. You won't get elected. And they all know that. That's why they don't do it. That's why they help the green thing, because there's more green voters. It's just politics. So that's a problem, a real problem. And it gets worse. Because this is and I think it was Dr. Humphrey, John Humphrey. Another speaker mentioned the spread of electorates earlier in the states. That's the first electoral map of New South Wales, the first election in 1904. The number of electorates, the population was much more evenly spread throughout the state back in 1904, but over time, as political power, politicians, political power and public money has been centralised into that smaller area, that electoral map has changed, and on average New South Wales loses one country electorate, one member of parliament every 5 years. The country, because the electorates are based on equal population, there's more population growth in the urban areas, even if the rural areas stay the same. Because the urban population growth is more, the country electorates get bigger in area all the time, and the number of electorates in the urban areas increases, and that's Victoria. In 40 years' time, I think it's 40 years' time or 60 years' time, I'm not sure, what was that? 70 years' time. If that long-term trend continues, in 70 years' time, New South Wales will have one electorate, one member of parliament for all that area west of the Great Dividing Range. And that's based on the long-term trend since 1904. So if anyone thinks, oh no, that won't happen, well, tell that to the last 115 years of history that has made it happen, and that's where we're going. And I'll just see if I can go back. That's the first electoral map of Victoria in 1904. Once again, you can see that the electorates and the population are much more evenly spread throughout the state. Victoria has actually lost on average one electorate, one member of parliament every 3 years from the country into the city. So we lose a member of parliament for so long, and in Victoria, in 60 years, Victoria, if the long-term trend continues in Victoria, that's what we will have, one member of parliament for all that area of Victoria. So I don't know, I hope people realise how important that is, because politics is numbers. It's not, like I said before, it's not who's right or wrong, or not who's good or bad, it's just who's got the numbers, and those are the numbers. So the conclusion I come to is if we stay in New South Wales, the future is pretty bleak. We will lose our jobs, simple as that. We'll lose, and as I said before, once we lose our jobs, we have to go. So what's the solution? Do we just accept that fate? And that's where, as I said before, no, I don't accept that. I don't just say, look, no, that's just what's going to happen. I'm going to lose my job. I've got to go, and so is my friend, and so is my neighbour, and so is my kids, and all that. We've all got to go. I don't accept that. So what other solution is there? And of course, that's what I'm proposing, and others. We're proposing the formation of a Riverina state separate from both New South Wales and Victoria, because as you know, the Riverina, it is really, I suppose you could say it's a very Victorian orientated part of New South Wales anyway, and it's very similar economy based on the natural resources such as water and timber and those type of industries. So the proposal is to form a Riverina state. Now, people may say, gee, can you actually do that? And like I said, it's not a new idea, but yes, you can form new states. And when Australia was federated back in 1901, they provided for the creation of new states. And the most relevant section is section 124. And I'll just say now, all this information is on the Riverina State website. So all one word, the riverinaState.com.au. All this information is there as well, plus a lot more. But you certainly can form another state. And there it is there. A new state may be formed by the separation of territory from a state, but only with the consent of the parliament thereof. And a new state may be formed by the union of two or more states or parts of states, but only with the consent of the parliaments affected. It's a very simple requirement. That's not complicated. All we need is the consent of the parliament of New South Wales for the New South Wales section and Victoria for the Victorian section. So, we want to form another state. Personally, I've concluded that's the only solution, and I'm working as hard as I can to make sure that that happens. So how do we form another state? I'll just start at the top. That's the end objective. We want to form the Riverina into a state of the Commonwealth of Australia. We don't want to secede from Australia, just another state in Australia. The only proceeding requirement is to gain the consent of the New South Wales Parliament for the New South Wales section and of the Victorian Parliament for the Victorian section. That's a little bit complicated, but it's quite simple. It's just two states, but it is a big job. Proceeding activities, in fact, practically there has to be a referendum, so we're ultimately aiming at a referendum on state formation, not of the people in Melbourne, not of the people in Sydney, just the people in that proposed state. I'm very confident that referendum will carry. The sentiment in the country areas is very favourable towards another state. So we have to aim at that, and to build up to a referendum, we are in the process of registering a party called the Riverina State Party and standing candidates in state and federal elections. There's a federal election in, I think it's a year or two, hopefully 2 years, but we want to stand candidates in the New South Wales electorates of Farrer, Riverina and Eden Monaro, and in Victoria in Mallee, Nichols and possibly Indi. So the reason we want to register a party and stand candidates is that's the best way to get the issue out into the open. This is great having a conference here, and I hope I'm putting my case pretty good. I can only hope for the best, but it's much better to get the name. The great advantage of having a registered party is you get your party name printed on every single in every voting ballot. So in each electorate there's about 100,000 voters and ballots. So the idea is to get the name, the Riverina State, which says the lot. It's a very self-explaining name, printed on 100,000 voting ballots in each electorate. So if we stand candidates in 6 electorates, that's 600,000 voting ballots. So it's great having a conference here and talking to some really good people, but the best way to get the message out there is to get the name printed on 600,000 voting ballots. And then give people the opportunity to express their support for state formation by voting for Riverina state candidates. So we may not get anyone elected, great if we do, and we're there to get candidates elected, but even if we don't, we give people the opportunity to express their support. It gets the issue right out there. That's the first thing, gets the issue right out there, gives people the opportunity to express their support. And those numbers that we get, now they're certified numbers. They're not just 2 people having a talk at a hotel or anything like that. They're registered with the Australian Electoral Commission, and we will use those numbers to leverage up to a referendum on state formation. So at the moment, the Riverina State Group, we've got just over 800 members. We have to register a party requires 1,500 members. That's the big thing. We hope to have that pretty soon. It does take time, takes effort, there's no doubt about it, but there's a lot of sentiment in support for it. And a Riverina State will have authority over the water for a start. It'll have authority over all the natural resources. What a Riverina State will do, it'll take the green-orientated population of Melbourne and the green-orientated population of Sydney out of the equation. They're not part of the decision-making process anymore. And I can assure you the decisions that are made will be a lot different and they'll be a lot better, because we'll keep the wealth production up, we'll keep the jobs up, we'll keep the people in the area. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what you say or do, just remember, it's for the benefit of the people. And I hear a lot of good people say a really lot of good things, but I just emphasise that we all emphasise it's for the good of the people. So that's what it's about. So we're there to form a Riverina State. Look, you will hear about this. It's great to hear about it now, but this is not just make-up, this is not make-believe, this is fair income, and to be quite frank, it will happen. It'll happen because, and it will happen because there's so many people agree. It has got public support. We just got to get out there and harness that support, and we'll get that. Now, the first thing we have to do, and this is an idea, just a political idea, part of the problem we've got is the ever-increasing size of electorates and the concentration of electorates into a smaller area. So what I don't want to do is recreate the same problem and all of a sudden, say, just for example, Albury's the capital of the Riverina, and after about 50 or 60 years, Albury becomes the Sydney of the Riverina. And we've got the same problem, except it's Albury that's sharpened instead of Sydney. So we don't want that. So a solution to that, and to be quite frank, it's a fundamental flaw in Australian politics in that electorates are based on equal population, because every state of Australia's got the same problem. There's a centralisation into every state because they've got the population, they've got the politicians, they've got the political power, and they've got the public money. All goes into that little area because politics sucks all the benefits into that area because that's where the people are. So we have to stop that. So an idea or a concept is, and one of the other speakers said that, look, it's all right having a revolution and chucking the old thing out, the old government out, but what are you going to put in its place? And that was a question that was put to me, or that I realised earlier on. I thought, well, okay, we really have to put something up in its place. We can't just say we don't know. So I've just put a few ideas that I think are essential. And this is essential, that there are area limits on electorates, so we don't have an increasing expansion of electorates. If you look at that map there, the simple formula of that map there is those electorates are based on no more than 10% of the area of the state. So no electorate gets bigger than 10% of the area of the state. And at the other end of the scale, we don't get any more than 10% of the electorates in 10% of the area of the states. So we don't keep getting an increasing concentration of political power into a smaller area. Now, and extra electors for every 10,000 voters. And if you can see those couple of little squares, and that's just some of the bigger towns where they have more representation, but there's a limit on how much representation they can get. And what that will do, it'll keep the political power decentralised throughout the state. Now, some people might say, gee, that's not very democratic. Well, it actually is. It's very democratic. And there's a precedent for area limits on electorates in the Australian Senate. Now, in the Australian Senate, every state, regardless of population, has 12 senators, regardless of population. So there's a precedent for area limits already in Australian politics. So the first thing is that's essential. That has to happen. It'll keep the political power decentralised throughout the state. And I'll just continue. Now, this is an afternoon's worth of discussion here, but I'll just summarise in a couple of minutes. Another few ideas that I'm proposing, because something had to be proposed, and I thought it was not adequate just to reproduce the same system, because the existing system is, in my opinion, fatally flawed. So, elect the Premier. 2 minutes to go. So, elect the Premier. Look, we can't have politicians electing premiers, or, in my opinion, prime ministers either. There's too many deals, there's too many reasons, there's too many, you give me a ministry and I'll vote for you, and if you don't, I'll throw you out, which has happened in the Liberal Party when Scott Morrison was re-elected. I mean, the funny deals that went on there to get Scott Morrison elected, you vote for me, I'll give you a ministry. Right, mate, you got my vote. Fair dinkum. So, we elect the Premier. The people elect the Premier. Now, the vote, it's not just a popular vote, it's a vote per electorate. At the moment, the Premier is elected by the members of Parliament. What it's done, it's just taken the power off the member of the Parliament to the people of each electorate. So when we have elections, the people per electorate vote for the Premier. Each electorate, going back to those, each one of those electorates there casts one preferential vote for the Premier. And what that'll do, for the Premier to be elected, he doesn't have to just cater for that populated area marked in blue. He has to cater for every person right throughout the state. Otherwise, he doesn't get elected. Or she, of course. But they have to cater for every person in all areas of the state. Number 3, the Premier governing separately from the legislature. Professor Zimmerman, you mentioned that we haven't got a separation of powers. This is a separation of powers. It separates the Premier from the legislature. So it's very much like the American system. You've got the executive and the legislature. This is proposing that as well. There is a separation of powers. And if we do have a rogue Premier or a rogue legislature, either party can call another election and they're all up for re-election. So there's a controlling factor there as well. And the fourth point that I think is also essential is term limits on political office. Politicians, to be quite frank, not all of them, but a lot of them just go corrupt. They're just there for a long time. What becomes more important than anything, if it's not already that right from the start, is their own political career. I don't think we can stop that. So there's just a brake put on that there, where you're only allowed in there for so long. So that's the proposal for a Riverina state.
Wasn't me, I didn't do that.
No, it's... I can only hope I've presented that reasonably well. But it's pretty radical, but to be quite frank, I don't know where you people are from, whether you're from these areas or from the urban areas or not, but to be quite frank, we're in a fight for our lives, certainly our jobs. It is that important, and while we're stuck where we are, we're gone. And that's why myself and a lot of other people are for this. But thank you very much for your time.